Hey everyone, Matt here. Just want to give a quick precursor and say that Max forgot to hit record before he did his joke in the intro, so we just hear the last little bit of it, which I think is very funny because then Luke says crushed it. Anyway, here's that bit.
Force for thought.
Crushed it. Only one alt. That's perfect.
Nailed it. Hello and welcome back to Force for Thought. Today we are going to be talking about some of the most emotional moments in Star Wars, specifically character deaths. We are going to be ranking our top 5 individual character deaths and then giving some honorable mentions along the way. So without any further ado, we're going to start with our number 5, and I'm going to start with Matthew.
Real quick, I feel like I always do this. One mention is we should mention that this is recording before the finale of Ahsoka.
That's a good point. If there is a notable death in the season finale of Ahsoka, then this is why it was not included, most likely.
Yes. We also did these much like we did the quotes, which is where we, Max's wife, Lauren, looked over these before we are talking about them. And so I'm looking at my list now for the first time re-edited so we don't have any duplicates. So basically whoever had the person higher on the list got it while the other people had to nix it. So my number 5 apparently is Yoda.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. So is it a kind of lame death? Yes. And so I'm wondering how you guys are going to view all of these deaths as well. To be 100% honest, Yoda was in my honorable mentions originally, which has shifted the list a bit.
Someone got kicked out of your top 5 because it was a repeat, so you bumped them up.
Like 3 people got kicked out of my top 5, so I have to rethink of all of this on the fly.
It must have been a lot of people because I was joking about my not top 5 for the 5 worst Star Wars deaths, and Yoda was in there for me.
Yeah. Wait, worst deaths?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He just kind of falls asleep and is like, all right, I'm going to go to bed.
He does, but I think what it means for the story is huge, right? I mean, it sets, yes, he dies in kind of a lame way, but I also feel like he goes out super graciously in comparison to, what he could have. He survived, how much he survived, the backstory, his history, and I think that it leaves Luke stranded, right? He's not fully trained. And so now he has to kind of go on by himself. So it's like, yes, Yoda, but it's also the implications of what Yoda's death brings to not only the story, but also Luke Skywalker.
Yeah,
So number
that's
5.
fair. There's also kind of a poetic justice there that Yoda was a Jedi Master for hundreds and hundreds of years and a great warrior at times. Then he actually did get a peaceful death at the end.
Which is a rarity. And especially for somebody that is like that high up and that well known, and has been through that many, so many battles. I think Yoda's death is, it is dumb and it's a little silly, right? But it is peaceful and it's kind of beautiful. He literally just kind of like yeets out, which is funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive on the one hand that he survived hundreds and hundreds of years in the position that he was, but then also the last 20, 30 years of his life, he was enemy number 1 of the Galactic Empire, and he just hunkered down and survived all that time and then peacefully died. Like, Sheev Palpatine is still kicking himself every day, even on Exegol, wondering about where Yoda is.
Yes, exactly. Again, it's the implications, what the entire galaxy.
Mm-hmm. All right.
In full disclosure, so when I made my list, I had narrowed it down to 17, and Yoda was not in there. I appreciate everything that you're saying, and I agree with everything that you're saying. I think from a story perspective, there was really no difference between him alive and him dead. So that was kind of my thinking as to why he didn't quite make the list for me.
To be fair, it's been a very busy day, and I got to start this list at 7 o'clock. It is currently like 8 o'clock.
All right, Luke, you're number 5.
My number 5, kind of a deep cut. I went from the Rise of Kylo Ren comic book with the Jedi Vo. So I know most people haven't read this comic, so I'll catch you up real quick. The Rise of Kylo Ren tells the story of Kylo Ren, assumedly what we knew from The Last Jedi is that Kylo destroyed Luke's temple, vanished with a handful of students, and slaughtered the rest. Well, the comic gets into it, and it was the Knights of Ren that blew up the temple, and then Kylo Ren ran off and joined them. And a couple of Luke's former Jedi students went to chase Ben Solo to bring him back to the light. And when he was joining the Knights of Ren, they kept saying that to join the Knights of Ren, you have to have one good kill to be initiated. And Kylo Ren, didn't love that, but eventually he fought the leader of the Knights of Ren, Ren himself, and he killed Ren and became the master of the Ren and said, "There's your good kill." And it was like kind of a narrative cop-out that he needed a good kill, but it was a bad guy, so it was justified. And it was releasing right before The Rise of Skywalker. And so everyone kind of thought that maybe Kylo Ren would be redeemed, and this comic was coming out, and we thought it was going to be like, oh, well, he didn't actually burn down the temple. He didn't actually slaughter all the students. He is just kind of misunderstood, and he was never really truly evil. But then at the end of the issue, Vo, one of the Jedi from Luke's temple, catches up to him after he kills Ren, and she says, it's not too late. You can come back. And he says, no, it is too late. And he stabs her. And that is the good kill. And that was his commitment to the dark side. And the implications that it means for the character, that he didn't have to be, never truly evil in terms of the sequel trilogy to be redeemed, because he was fully on board with the dark side. And he was 100% committing himself to embracing darkness. And it's not that he was not so far gone that he couldn't come back. He was completely gone, and he could still come back. And there's never a point that's too far for you to be redeemed.
Oh, I like everything you said, Luke. That's really cool.
It was really good, and it's a total of 4 issues, and there are a bunch of other Jedi from the temple that are in it as well, and they kind of like slowly die off, but they kind of die like not directly at the hands of Kylo Ren, but like indirectly, right? And so everyone,
yeah, the whole series, you're thinking that they're just doing cop outs, that he never actually killed anyone, and this is all, he's just misunderstood.
And then at the very end of the last issue, he finally kills someone in cold blood, and you're like, oh, okay, there it is.
Yes,
he's evil. Yeah, I love that. Fan of the comics, I love that. That was a deep pull, but I appreciate it. My number 5 is a little more of a low-hanging fruit. I went with Luke Skywalker. Now, it's kind of hard to split, Luke's death from the moment of everything else that's going on. We've talked about it before, everything going on with so many character arcs being completed in The Last Jedi in that moment, right? So you have Kylo Ren, who thinks he's defeated Luke Skywalker, only to find out that he still has much to learn. You have Rey, who's finally learning to use the Force and trust in the Force. Poe, who's learning to be a leader. And Finn, who I guess maybe Finn, I should say, is learning to trust in the Force. But you have a lot of these story arcs kind of coming to a conclusion, and then it ends with Luke Skywalker peacefully overlooking the 2 suns over Ankh-To that parallel the 2 suns over Tatooine, obviously, and then he passes away peacefully. And I think it is beautiful and poetic, and his death and the 10 minutes leading up to it always gives me goosebumps.
Yeah,
See, I think. Sorry,
I was saying I agree. Now I'm all frazzled. You'll have to cut this. It's a great, again, poetic justice for the beginning and end of Luke's character arc as a Jedi, that Yoda taught him a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. And then Luke does that to such a skillful degree that it literally kills him. And that is the epitome of what a Jedi should be.
I agree with everything. I really agree with what both of you are saying. The only thing is, I feel like I don't love that death scene specifically because I feel like it is overshadowed by everything that comes before. It doesn't feel like he gets his own moment to die. It's literally like it's like 20 seconds. It is very like Obi-Wan, right? It's like a combination of almost Obi-Wan and Yoda, which is great, but at the same time it feels like it's overshadowed by everything else that is going on to me. Where like Han Solo, he gets the full scene of his death, right? Even even Leia, she gets a full scene of just like this death. But then I feel like for Luke, it's just kind of wrapped up into this epic scene.
I think that's very fair. Yeah, that's kind of how I started it too, saying like it's hard to differentiate his death from everything else that's going on because it is such a great part of the movie. That's totally fair. All right, let's move on to our number 4s. Luke.
All right. My number 4, I took a character from the books. This time I went to the High Republic. So I will be spoiling it. I know you guys haven't read it, despite my many asks that you please read it. But I'm just going to go ahead and throw caution to the wind and say, you're never going to read it. So whatever, I'm going to spoil it for you. It's really good.
You can spoil it, but we'll get around to it.
The Rising Storm, one of the Jedi, Loden Greatstorm, has one of the most impactful deaths in all of Star Wars. So, again, to catch you up on the story, Loden Greatstorm was captured by the bad guys, the Nihil, and he was tortured for weeks or months. And they, starved him, tortured him with, like, I don't remember exactly how, pain, and they, like, sheared off, he was a Twi'lek, they, like, sheared off his Leku, and when they finally get to him, he got, stubs for Leku, and he's very malnourished and scarred up, but it wasn't the physical torture that got to him because as a Jedi, he was so well trained to handle it, they started bringing in other people and torturing them in front of him because they couldn't handle it. And as a Jedi, he was so empathetic that he could feel their pain. And so that's how they tortured him for weeks or months. And it's super dark and super sad. But then they finally rescue him, and he is beaten up and bruised, and he starts fighting his way out with his yellow lightsaber. And it's an amazing scene. And then the Nihil finally unleash the Leveler for the first time, which is the main villain, it's not the villain, the main monster in the High Republic. It is nameless. They refer to it as the Nameless sometimes. It's like a big cat, kind of like a lion, and it just sucks the life right out of Force users. As soon as it shows up, anyone that's Force sensitive starts feeling panicked, and they completely lose their connection to the Force, and if it gets close enough, they turn to dust. And so Loden is fighting for his life, trying to get out, and this lion comes over to him, and he just drops dead in complete terror, turns to stone, and then to dust. And it is so tragic that he was so tortured for such a long time, and then he finally got out, and then they unleash the most devastating weapon that anyone has ever used against the Jedi in all of Star Wars.
Wow. That is brutal.
That is brutal. That's really cool.
All right. Well, I'm sold. I'm going to start reading the High Republic. I have read the High Republic comics, and I think that is in some of the comics.
Yes, you see the what's it called? The Trail of Shadows comic series. Issue 1 opens up with a still image of Loden Greatstorm turned to dust, because that whole series is about like a comic noir detective story about finding out what it is that turns Jedi to dust.
Yeah.
And Loden was the inciting
really
incident.
cool.
That makes sense because it's really good, but I always felt like I was missing something of that story. And that's part of like why I'm struggling to get into the High Republic, is because it's so interrelated with itself that I'm like finding it difficult to know where to jump onto it. Because I'm reading the comics. I'm reading all the comics from the High Republic, but it's like you feel like you're missing like half a story.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, so my number 4, much to the consternation of many, I went with Vice Admiral Amilyn Holdo, the infamous Holdo maneuver. I know that a lot of people dislike it. A lot of people think that it breaks Star Wars, and they are absolutely wrong. It is one of the coolest deaths in all of Star Wars. It is one of the coolest moments, and this is basically just going to be a big defense of the Holdo maneuver. So buckle up for a second. So everyone always says like, oh, the Holdo maneuver is silly. Like it kind of like breaks Star Wars. It's overpowered and everything like that. And it's not. It was a moment of sacrifice where Amilyn Holdo did what she had to do just to give the rebels a little more time to get to the planet. Because when you break down what happened, that's all that she did. She drove her ship into light speed through the Supremacy, Snoke's flagship, and it fractured and it broke all the other ships and everything kind of was destroyed. But it wasn't gone forever. And you cut back to the Supremacy, and almost everyone on board is fine. I mean, all the main characters are fine. The ships are dismantled, but they're still able to evacuate the ships. They're able to get their walkers back down to the planet. It's not an overpowered move at all. It's not something that's not based in reality, because if you had this universe where hyperspeed exists, this is something that people would be doing, because we know from our own history that kamikaze attacks exists. Just look at Pearl Harbor, and that didn't break warfare or anything like that. So I always think that that's kind of silly and upsetting. But anyway, it was a moment of a great sacrifice, obviously, and she did it to save the rebels, and it was beautiful, and it's an incredible moment on screen. I remember watching that scene in the movie theater, and the moment where all the volume just kind of cuts out and everyone's just speechless. It was amazing.
So anybody who wants to argue against you has to argue for Pearl Harbor, it sounds like.
Correct.
Really got him trapped there.
Yeah, really good call on that one. No, I agree. I think Holdo's death is really cool. I mean, it is the sacrificial moment, and I think I loved like seeing those. I think AMC posted it when it was like on all the doors for Last Jedi, when it was like, this is an intentional creative decision that all the sound will go off. There's no
Really?
Yeah.
I remember those signs, yeah.
which is so funny. But yeah, I mean, it's a great moment. I wish we understood her a little bit more, but it's almost more intriguing the fact that we don't really understand her much more, because it's just like, yep, she was good the entire time, and she literally is sacrificing herself so that other people can go on, and that's everything you kind of need to know about her. And I'm kind of surprised we haven't been introduced to her in some sort of, I guess we haven't really had the chance, but in another sort of show or something. I feel like she'd be a really interesting character to kind of to explore, and she's got purple hair. Is that a genetic thing, I assume now? You know, like we were talking about with Jason Syndulla.
Yeah, could be one of her parents is a purple Twi'lek.
Exactly.
I think it was confirmed, wasn't it, in The Princess of Alderaan?
In Leia, Princess of Alderaan.
Oh.
I do believe she has 2 human parents.
Because is she a main character in that book? I have never read that one.
I never finished it, but yeah, she's pretty main.
Is it? Okay. But she's a kid, right? With Leia.
Yeah, because Leia, it was before A New Hope, so Leia was, however old, 19 in A New Hope, so it's at least, she's younger than that. I would guess she's probably like 15 in this book. And Amilyn Holdo similar.
And I know she makes a couple very minor appearances in some of the Star Wars mainline comic series. I think that's about it, though. We really don't see a whole lot.
Have we seen
lot
the
from her.
Battle of Chiron Belt in the comics? Because I'm still holding out for that story.
Because Poe Dameron references that.
Yeah.
I don't believe so. No, I'm pretty far behind on the main line though.
They must be cooking up something real cool for that if they're holding on to it this long. They know we're clamoring for it. At least I am. Maybe I'm alone.
You can't allude to that and not tell us what it was.
Exactly.
All right,
Just
Matt.
like Obi-Wan's brother. You gotta.
Oh, we'll get Obi-Wan's brother. Don't
We
worry.
will not.
I know,
Someone
sorry.
somewhere already knows that story.
I was bringing that up for Luke. My number 4 is Count Dooku. I'm taking this a little bit.
I wanted Count Dooku in my list, but I
Yeah.
couldn't justify it. I'm glad we get to talk about him.
Once again, to be fair, he was in my honorable mentions. But I think Count Dooku, I think it's more, you guys have some super cool deaths. I think, Luke, you're going really, really more in the weeds, I think, with your books and comics. But I think Count Dooku, I'll never forget in like 2005 when, I was 12, I think, 11 or 12 when I went to go see Revenge of the Sith. And I remember the hype towards it, and this is like, really peak fandom, especially at the time. And the fact that Count Dooku just got murdered in the first 10 minutes is still shocking. And then the fact that, like, he looks so shocked right before he dies is a great performance by Christopher Lee. It still gets me to this day because I could not fathom that was actually happening.
The sound of the 2 lightsabers shrieking off each other.
So, yeah, it's great. I mean,
Like a pair of scissors.
and it feels like with the Emperor, it feels just like obviously reminiscent, right, of Return of the Jedi. And I feel like he's in his chair, he's in his throne, and you get Anakin like kind of officially getting that first step into the dark side. And yeah, I think Count Dooku, once again, not only for Anakin and for Count Dooku, but what it means for the galaxy, and then what that leads to. Number 4, Count Dooku.
That's a very good pick.
Yeah. I didn't even think of that one. That one wasn't on my list at
Really?
all, and it probably should have been. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that was a
one.
good pick.
And the imagery of the blue and the red.
Yeah. I would have had
That's
to go
great.
into the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which is not technically canon, to talk about Count Dooku's death, and I didn't want to get into non-canon stuff, but
We talked about it already.
Another plug for the Revenge of the Sith novelization. It's really good, and it's not canon, but it might as well be. It's not uncanon, and it's got some really cool parts in it.
All right. Moving on to our number 3 picks, and I will go first so that I can wrap up my trilogy of picks from The Last Jedi, because my number 3
Oh yeah, they're
is...
all from The Last Jedi so far.
That movie's so good.
It's good. There's a lot of good deaths in it. My number 3 pick is Snoke himself. So again, hard to differentiate his death from just the scene and everything else that's going around it, but it is my favorite scene. Ooh, hold on. Got to think about that before I say it. I'm going to say it. My favorite scene in all of Star Wars.
All right.
The moment where Kylo Ren uses the Force to manipulate Rey's lightsaber and activates it in order to cut him in half, and then Rey calls the lightsaber to herself. Kylo Ren and Rey lock eyes and then go back to back and fight the Praetorian Guard. It's one of the top... If it's not my favorite scene, it is certainly in my top 5.
Yeah, I remember being in the theater with you and I was just shrieking. It was a great moment.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite theater experiences of all time.
Yep.
I remember he ignites the blade and cuts Snoke in half. And you're like, oh my god, this could not be cooler. Then the music starts to crescendo, and he brings the lightsaber forward, and then Rey's hand pops up from the bottom of the frame and grabs
Yeah.
it. And it's like, oh my
Yeah.
god, this scene is even cooler than it could be.
Everyone freaks out about Captain America taking Thor's hammer, which me saying Thor's hammer and not the actual name is probably an indicator that like that moment is cool. But like it was fine, right? I'm like, yeah, Captain America can do everything. What a surprise! What a boring character. And for us, I feel like it is this moment in that theater experience where I'm like, everyone's reaction to Captain America getting the hammer is exactly how I felt during that moment in Last Jedi.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But way more interesting, I think.
Matt, number
Yeah.
3.
Number 3. Okay, guys, this is actually this is the more exciting one because it's actually not in my honorable mentions that actually made my list of my top 3. I mentioned this before. I don't think this comes as any surprise, but number 3 is Tech. I love the Bad Batch. I specifically love Tech. I'm glad everybody else seems to as well. I think his death, much like Kanan, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, comes as a total surprise. Obviously, Tech's at the end of the season, so we don't really know what happens afterwards or anything. But it is not a death that I saw coming at all, and it's in such a not minor, but it's in such a minor inconvenience that we have seen them beat, and we have seen them overcome this little inconvenience, and
yes,
yet
I agree because these characters are constantly in mortal danger.
Yes.
And if they're gonna go out, it's like, oh, they have plot armor, so they're gonna survive this and
Yep.
this terrible threat. And it's just the simplest thing that actually gets them in the end.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And that's why I think Yoda's is so good, where it doesn't. He was able to survive, right? His death. And I think Tech, he did it for his family, and I think he like he always does. They don't follow orders. And I think it is a beautiful moment. And I was a couple episodes behind, and Max, I think, called me and was like, you have to finish this right now. And I was like, well, last time Max said that, which was the Breaking Bad season 3 finale, like a decade ago. And so I was like, well, I have to do stop whatever I'm doing now and just finish Bad Batch. And he was 1000% correct. And it was such a downer the rest of the day.
And it is so unexpected too, because even though we've seen the Clone Wars and Rebels and we know that these characters can die, you still think like, oh, plot armor, this is a kid's show, they're not going to kill off any major characters, right? Because during that whole scene, I never even thought of his death as a possibility, because like
Never.
Luke said, they keep getting out of these situations one way or another. And then it was when he delivered his final line, when he raised his blaster and said, when have we ever followed orders?
Yeah.
That was when I was like, oh my God. And then he shoots the little cable or whatever that was holding him up, and then he falls to his death, and it unleashes the cable car that they were on, saving them and everything. It was beautiful.
And then when they throw his goggles to confirm he's dead, is heartbreak or not dead. I don't know. We'll see.
I think they threw those goggles to confirm that they found his body.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this a lot too, but just that was like the nail in the coffin, where it's just like, wow, there's like presumably, especially in that moment, no chance that he's actually alive.
I do not read that moment the same, but
Really?
I love Tech's death,
Yeah,
Interesting.
no matter how permanent it proves.
we might have to redo this episode. We'll see.
Well, I mean, no matter what happens, even if he's in season 3, episode 1 of the Bad Batch, that scene will not change. It was still an amazing scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Luke, number 3.
My number 3 comes from Andor. I had to include something from Andor because it's my favorite show of all time, and Nemec's death is so impactful.
Oh, that's a good one. Luke.
I was thinking when I was making this list, it has to, how does this death affect the story or the characters or the audience? And this death affected me in the audience so impactfully. Cut that.
No. I
just reused the word impactful twice though, because this death impacted me in the audience so substantially, because I was just sitting there watching it, and it was an intense scene. They're, stealing the Imperial payroll from the planet that's name escapes me. What's the planet?
I don't know.
the-
Ahsoka just started.
Oh
That's
my
all I'm
God.
thinking about.
Why can't I think of it?
Aldhani.
Aldhani.
The Aldhani heist. Oh my God!
They're stealing the Imperial payroll from Aldhani, and they're getting away, and it's really intense. And they got away from the Imperials. They shut the door, and they're not getting shot at anymore. And as soon as they launch, Nemec just gets crushed by a crate.
Yep.
And even when they're getting away, they give him the space morphine, and so he can still do the navigation, and he's shouting climb, just like K2SO did in his death scene, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And it's an amazing scene, and I was so confident that he was going to live, and then they debated whether or not to try to save him, to take him to the surgeon that was built into the contingency, and they take him there, and he still dies. And we talked about just now about plot armor, and you knew in Andor that there's not necessarily as much plot armor because they're doing it in 3 episode arcs, so these characters don't necessarily need to carry over from one arc to the next. But just the way he died so unceremoniously, yet so, it was just such a stark moment when that crate hit him, and I felt like I got punched in the gut.
That's one of Max and I always talk about this. Is one of Max's like least favorite things in movies is jarring deaths that just kind of happen, like in Pulp Fiction when the guy gets shot
Yeah, it's
in the
freaky.
car. And it's like not necessarily the same because he doesn't die instantly. It's debatably worse where he does get crushed, and it's because of a fluke. Basically, he was just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it is heartbreaking. And like we talk about Andor and Nemec all the time, but man, like that is a character that you could see in other things and other stories and continuing on, and yet they begin him and end him within like two to three episodes.
Yes, and not to mention his legacy, that his manifesto goes on to shape Cassian's life as a rebel and get the plans to the Death Star, essentially.
Yeah.
And Andor gets a lot of credit for being such a grounded Star Wars show, and I think that's one of the most grounded moments ever, because it's not like this great, fantastical death. Like Matt said, he was just standing at the wrong place at the wrong time, and going to the surgeon, which they had built into the contingency, and him still dying, that's just like a super grounded moment where it's just like, yeah, sometimes people don't survive going to the hospital. Like his injuries were just too great. And we've never really seen that in Star Wars.
And we've talked before about how he was saying, I can't feel my legs. And we were all thinking like, oh my God, he's going to be in a wheelchair. Like we've never really seen that in Star Wars. That'll be interesting. And then, nope, just dead.
That
Yeah.
is not what I was thinking when that happened.
Oh, really?
No.
You didn't have that thought when he mentioned
No.
I can't feel my legs? I know you did.
Yeah, I thought, well, yeah.
All I thought was, oh my God, he's paralyzed. That's not good.
Well, I had a lot of thoughts that go into my head. I was like, oh, that's cool. They're going to be like have him in a wheelchair or something. We've never seen that.
So
Like, that's
you're-
inclusive. But then I also was like,
Professor X.
yeah, basically. That's exactly what I thought,
So
actually.
your thought was someone gets crushed, and you're just thinking about how he's going to get around the rest of his life. Not even.
Well, he was talking about how he can't feel his legs. So it
Yeah,
seemed
I
like
think-
that was going to be the main problem.
But
Answer
yes,
this.
because I thought it was silly. Because as soon as I thought that, I was like, oh, no, they'll just give him some sort of cybernetic legs.
I
I
was
was
gonna
like, there's a million ways he could still walk.
I was going to say, did the Darth Maul spider legs cross your mind
Yes,
in that moment?
that was the second thing. The first was a wheelchair, because I was like, we've never seen that in Star Wars. Then I was like, we haven't seen that in Star Wars for a reason. He can get cybernetic legs. And then he died, and I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It was a whirlwind. It was a whirlwind of emotions.
Yeah, great death.
All right, moving on to our number twos. Matthew.
Number 2. This is my actual number 2 as well, and it should come as no surprise. It is going back to A New Hope. It is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I love Obi-Wan. I know I say Kanan is my favorite Jedi. Obi-Wan probably realistically is. It's between Obi-Wan and Kanan. But Obi-Wan's death, I mean, I love A New Hope, and I think that is like the crux of that movie, and it just sends everybody on their paths. And, you know, seeing Kenobi, the show, it has so much more weight now for Leia, but beyond that, it's, I mean, obviously with Luke and everything too, like him seeing kind of his master, he's only known for a brief moment in time, die right in front of his eyes. It is that push to officially, you know, have him go in towards this journey. And it's like, yes, this lightsaber is cool, right? And it's all these different mythical things. But I think that is the moment of realness that really gets them. They're doing this heist. They're doing a breakout thing. It's not fun in games necessarily until that point, but the stakes are raised instantly when Obi-Wan Kenobi dies. And beyond that, the most important part is the fact that he's facing, you know, Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, and it is a beautiful moment where he chooses to go out by himself. Everything, it's not satisfying to Darth Vader. He strikes him down, and it is not because he's better than him, it's because Obi-Wan chooses to. And we see him consistently outbeat Anakin, and he does it as a final moment. He beats him again by just letting him kill him without any sort of skill. He just lets him do it.
And I had Obi-Wan in my honorable mentions, actually.
Hey-o.
And for what it did, I think, for the story as a whole. I wasn't around in 1977 when the movie came out. I just kind of grew up with it, so I don't really know what it would have been like to experience Obi-Wan Kenobi's death the first time. But I imagine that had to have been the first moment in, maybe not the first, but the biggest moment in Star Wars when people first watched it, when they were like, oh my goodness, like this Force actually means something bigger,
Yeah.
like what he was describing, rather than just simply, being able to do a Jedi mind trick,
Yeah.
or kind of make a noise with your hands, because up until his death, that was really all we saw of the Force, right? He trained Luke to defend against that little blaster droid without seeing. He did a Jedi mind trick, and he made a little noise to distract some stormtroopers. And up until then, that was like the only thing we knew about the Force. And then we see him die, and he just disappears, and then he's suddenly communing with Luke through the Force. I feel like that's when the audience is immediately plunged into this bigger world of what the Force could actually be.
Yeah.
I love what it means for Darth Vader's character arc because he's been hunting Kenobi and obsessed with him for 20 years, and he finally confronts him and he knows he can beat him. And then Obi-Wan says, "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine." And Vader finally wins the fight, but loses the war against Obi-Wan because he finally wins and he disappears and becomes more powerful than anything Vader could ever dream of. And so it's just such, I mean, it's not tragic because Vader's a villain, but in his eyes, it is so tragic that you finally won and you still lost.
Wow, I've never thought about that. Yeah, how infuriating that had to have been for Darth
Oh, yeah.
Vader, who was wanting that moment for nearly 20 years.
And he got robbed.
And
of it.
Obi-Wan, yeah. Wow, that is an excellent pick, Matthew.
Thank you.
Luke, number 2.
Number 2, I've always talked about this death because I think it gets really overlooked, and it is L3 in Solo: A Star Wars Story.
Good pick. That's a
That
great pick.
movie, whether you like it or not, I love it. I know a lot of people think it's average, but that death is so impactful because the whole character of L3, first of all, is like a feminist droid who, well, not feminist, but whatever the equivalent is for droid rights in Star
Droid rights,
Wars.
yeah.
Space feminist with droids. She wants droids to be treated as the same as sentient people because droids are sentient, but are they? But are they owned as slaves, or do they have free will, or what happens when they die? And then she dies, and she says to Lando as he's holding her, and a lot of this goes to Donald Glover's performance also. But while she's saying, "What's happening to me?" you don't know, because first of all, we don't know what death is like, but we certainly don't know what droid death is like. Is it the same? Are droids sentient enough to experience death the same way we do? We don't even know what death is. And all those thoughts just go through my mind every time when L3's dying, and it's just so sad.
Does it make you feel any better that they don't revive her, but they are able to use her memory or her navigational computer and upload it to the Falcon, so that in a sense she kind of lives on through the Falcon?
It does
But
not.
trapped. We always talk about that. That's the opposite of what she wanted, right?
Which is to be free. Now
Yeah.
she's just a navigational
Exactly.
computer.
It does not make me feel better. That's like if you're watching The Walking Dead and your favorite character dies. Oh, does it make you feel better that their body gets to still be used as a zombie? No, it does not.
But there's the point in Empire where C-3PO references it to Han Solo, and he says, "I don't know where your navigational computer learned to speak," or I forget what the exact line was, but it was something to that extent.
Peculiar dialect.
Peculiar dialect, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun tie-in, and I'm glad it's there. But no, it does not make me feel better for L3 because, yeah, like what Matt said, that is the opposite of what she wanted in life, and now she's stuck with it in death. It's even more sad.
So one of your favorite deaths is one of your. How am I trying to say this? One of your favorite deaths is one of your least favorite. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna cut that. It was like, oh, I can make this. Nope, just fled my mind.
Okay, well, building off of droid deaths, I will go ahead with my number 2, and it is K2SO.
You son of a bitch.
That's a good one.
It is a really emotional moment in Rogue One where Cassian and Jyn are trying to get the plans to the Death Star, and K2SO is holding the stormtroopers at bay, and he is the first of the Rogue One crew to die. So you don't really see it coming, and then he starts to get shot, and you kind of start to put it together, and you're like, oh no, he's going to die. And then he's telling them that they need to climb and that they can still upload the schematics from the navigational beacon or whatever it is at the top. And then he ultimately sacrifices himself, locking the door so that they could climb. And it was just a beautiful moment of sacrifice. And when K2SO falls to the ground lifeless, you see the light in K2SO's eyes just slowly dim, and it's just such a sad moment. And it wasn't the moment for me in Rogue One where I realized that everyone was going to die, even though it should have been. Because as soon as that happened, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they killed off K2SO. That was crazy. I love that character. And then it wasn't until like 3 more deaths later where I was like, oh, I see what they're doing here.
Yeah, it's a heavy thud when he falls too. But
Yes, it is.
And I think for such a funny character that's consistently cracking jokes, to go out that way is like super noble, and it is so jarring. Like that's a movie that like I'll be afraid to show my kids at some point, because it's like, oh, this fun droid who's gonna be your favorite. K2SO is truthfully in my top 5 as well. Obviously a little lower than Maxwell's. But K2SO is legitimately one of my favorite characters in Star Wars of all time because he's able to balance that wittiness, but he's able to beyond his design, kind of hold his own and then also sacrifice himself. And I think that's a theme throughout all of these deaths that we're kind of circling is sacrifice. I feel like a lot of these characters just do sacrifice themselves.
Yeah, because it's not just the sacrifice of his life; it's the sacrifice. Like he locks the doors so that the stormtroopers can't get to Jyn and Cassian, but also because he knows if he didn't, that Cassian would come back and try to save him.
Yeah.
And for the good of the mission and for the good of Cassian, he can't do that. So he has to lock the door for both their sakes.
Exactly.
Do you think in that moment he was also knowingly sacrificing Jyn and Cassian too? Because he said you can still upload it. He never really said a plan to get out of there, and then he obviously locked them in.
I don't think he knew. I don't think he really had the choice. He was like, this is as far as my mission goes. It's up to them now. I don't think he thought 5 steps ahead. I think he was just like, this is the end of the road.
Interesting.
Do you think he was like, they're gonna go die now as well?
No, it was just a thought that I had just now. That when he locked, like when you were saying how he locked the door, I was like, oh yeah, he was kind of locking them in there, wasn't he? But
I've never thought about that. That is interesting because I think so. I think he knew when he was dying that Jyn and Cassian, one way or another, were also going to die in the next hour or so.
To be fair, it was a suicide mission, right? They knew kind of what they were getting into. So.
Correct, but it goes back to what I was saying originally, which is how I really should have seen it coming that they were all going to die, but
we all should have, and no one did.
No.
Do you mind if I can start with my number 1 now? Unless that goes out of order, but it feels like...
No, go for it.
The perfect lead-in, which is my number 1, which is a bit of a cop-out, I guess, because it's technically 2 people, which is Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor.
Nice.
That is my number 1, and it's a beautiful moment. I love the scene, but what I love more than that is that these 2 people come from almost opposite sides of the rebellion. One born into it, one that comes into it, one that runs away from it and eventually comes around to it, right? And then the other one who wants nothing to do with it and then goes in so hardcore. And no matter, basically both of these people from different sides of the rebellion come together and have the same exact ending. And I think that is what it's about. It is about the sacrifice, and at the end of the day, even though Jyn is pretty new to the rebellion, right? She has this long history with it, but she's been running from it. And then Cassian, who has dedicated the better half of his life to it, both meet the same fate, and it's because of the greater good. And I think it's a beautiful moment. I also, as we've talked about, love Rogue One, love Andor. I love Jyn Erso. And yeah, I think and also, you know, Andor in that show, in that movie specifically is like my least favorite character. And I think at the end you're like, oh man, that does suck though. I want to see more of them. And I'm so glad we are, because it's making one of the best Star Wars shows, the best Star Wars show we have seen. I might eat my words again. Ahsoka has not ended yet for us in this time, but yeah, Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor.
And I think one of the reasons, going back to this theme of sacrifice, why that sacrifice was so emotional was because they don't know if what they did was worth it.
Yeah.
One of her last lines is, do you think anybody, or maybe Cassian said it, one of the two said, do you think anybody is listening?
Yeah.
And that is such like a sad, tragic line where luckily we as the audience know that they were and that they received the schematics and that they eventually blew up the Death Star, but they didn't know that. They were just laying down their lives for this suicide mission, this small chance to get this plan so that maybe they could blow it up in the future.
They do it all for hope.
I know.
Exactly.
And it's beautiful, and it's a quote that I think about every single time we record this podcast.
What, that quote? which quote?
Do you think anybody's listening?
That's hilarious. We know they are, and they're all in Nebraska
Shout out to our Nebraska fans.
and Wisconsin newly.
Luke, number 1.
Well, I just had one more thing to say about Cassian and Jyn, because they do die, and it's disastrous, and they do it all for the hope that they're making the galaxy a better place. And that's the whole theme of Rogue One is hope, and rebellions are built on hope. And we don't really get to see the impact of the inspiration that they lay down for what the rebellion can be until the only example, at least I can think of directly, is in Alphabet Squadron, the trilogy. Chasna Chaddock, she views Jyn Erso as kind of her North Star on what a rebel should be and what she should do. And it's really satisfying to see that sacrifice be laid so bare and what it actually resulted in years and years later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Smart Luke Taylor.
Definitely one of the best ones out there. Luke, your number 1.
My number one, I've never been so confident in a list in all of our recording this podcast because I got Kanan for number one.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe we could all probably agree unanimously is the best Star Wars death of all time.
It was in my top 5, and it got kicked out because I had it as my number 3. I thought Matt was going to have it as his number 1, and then when you started going into Rogue One, I was like, oh, this makes sense. So I put it together at the last second. I was like, son of a... Luke stole it.
I also had it number 3.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
Interesting. So we all agree, probably then, unanimously.
And also, K2SO was my number 5.
Okay.
That's a backtrack.
Yes. Go ahead. We'll let you talk about Kanan because you ranked it the highest, but nothing but agreement out of us.
Same.
Yes, it is not just that he is sacrificing himself to save Hera, the mother of his child, his Padawan, not to mention Sabine, who is a great friend of him and a found family. It's not just that he is destroying the fuel depot that is powering the TIE Defender program, which is like their whole mission was to shut down that program. He is saving his friends. He's completing the mission. Also, the mythological aspect of it, that he is a Jedi as it should be, using the Force for knowledge and defense as it should be, like I said earlier. And he is holding back this explosion just long enough to get his friends to safety. He gets his sight back so that he can see his family one last time, making good on that thing he said to Hera in season 2 finale when they're going off to Mortis, and Kanan says, "I'll see you again," which he gets blinded right after, and it's really tragic that he's never able to see her again. But he does see her that one last time, so he makes good on that promise. And it's just so, like we were talking about with Tech, it's out of left field. It's not even the finale to Rebels. It's like it's not the middle, but there's like a solid 3 or 4 or 5 episodes after
5
that.
episodes, yeah. Episode 10,
And,
Jedi
yeah.
Knight.
Yeah, I just think it is absolutely perfect.
When he is able to see Hera again, I tear up every single time I see that. I just showed my wife Lynn that the other. I'm saying my wife Lynn to the audience. I think they know that. They clearly know that you guys know who that is. I showed her the other day. I don't know why, because Ahsoka's on. Who am I kidding? And yeah, I just start tearing up. It was just so odd when you're showing somebody something they have no context and you're like, what are you doing right now? But it is so sad, and it is so beautiful too. And then he force pushes and just fades to white. Oh,
And also, I don't resonate with the Tech death as much because I had it spoiled for me, which I normally don't mind spoilers too much, but I do think the Tech death was a little bit less exciting for me because of that. But for months, I didn't watch Rebels while it released, and I was rewatching it, and I would see, like, on Twitter, a picture of that final image of Kanan with his eyesight back, and I didn't even recognize him because he got a haircut, and
Yeah.
I'm watching it, and he's blind, so I'm like, who's this idiot? I don't know. I have no idea who it is. And then
No
it
beard.
happened, and I was like, oh my God, that's been Kanan this whole time? Yes, Twitter, I do agree this is the most impactful moment in all of Star Wars.
Luke is the type of person who would have been confused by Clark Kent wearing his glasses as a disguise. I have never seen this man before in my life.
He looks very different with the haircut.
He does.
It's a jarring difference.
He does. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And Clone Wars, which we talk about a lot, and I absolutely love Clone Wars. There's a lot of really sad, kind of darker moments in it. And Rebels, I feel like, didn't have nearly as many, but this one was probably one of the most impactful. I agree. And it was a moment that just takes everyone off guard because you don't expect it from what you think is a kid's show, and then you see such an emotional death, and then afterwards you're just like kind of sitting in that, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you just said though is that it knows when to pack a punch, and it does. You know, in Clone Wars, it has a lot of people to kill off. Oh, we didn't do our honorable mentions before number 1. Oh well, that doesn't matter because Kanan's the best.
We'll get to them. We'll talk about our honorable mentions
like,
in a second.
Like 5s is very sad too.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a lot of those moments in Clone Wars, but in Rebels, it's like it's a very small group of people. But yeah, man, Kanan is the best. We can talk forever about it.
We didn't do our honorable mentions because it segued in too nicely, just like this is segueing into my number 1, which is from the Clone Wars. It is a character named Satine Kryze. So for those of you who have seen Clone Wars, know that I don't really need to explain it. For those of you who haven't seen Clone Wars, Satine Kryze was the Duchess of Mandalore, and it was revealed that in an earlier life, Satine Kryze and Obi-Wan Kenobi had a little romantic interest in each other. And in a moment of vulnerability, Obi-Wan confided in Satine that had she asked him to leave the Order, he would have done it for her. And the reason that Obi-Wan was back with Satine during this time was because Darth Maul, who was also brought back in the Clone Wars, is going to Mandalore to take it over, and Darth Maul does so by assassinating Satine Kryze right in front of Obi-Wan, and she dies in his arms. Now, again, this is supposed to be a kid's show, and it's one of the saddest moments. They introduce a love interest for Obi-Wan Kenobi, where no groundwork was put for that in any movie prior to this. This was 100% introduced in the show just to have her die off in his arms, just to basically test Obi-Wan Kenobi, because Darth Maul is doing this to test Obi-Wan, to try to push him into the dark side. And Obi-Wan tells him that only the weak can succumb to the dark side. It takes true strength to oppose it. And this was the ultimate test for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it was the death of the love of his life. And as she's dying in his arms, she tells him that she has always loved him. And it's one of the saddest moments in all of Star Wars.
It's a beautiful moment, and also it makes Maul's death so much more satisfying too, that he also kills him. But yeah, I think it's a great choice. I don't know if it's my number. I would put it as my number one, not to poo-poo your number one
You
choice.
clearly didn't.
It's a great choice. But I think that is incredibly sad, and I do like seeing that side of Obi-Wan. And I think we've been saying this the entire time, but the implications around it. We've known Obi-Wan, and to see that other layer, and kind of why he is the way he is when he's like a little bit older, a little bit more like stoic and hardened too. It's a great moment.
And it's just a great way to humanize him too, because it's like, of course he would have had some sort of love interest when he was younger. You know, who doesn't?
Yeah.
Not to take the wind out of your sails a little bit more after Matt's already dumping on your choice, but
What the heck?
when you were saying that,
To be fair, we also, we should just let Luke for number one for Kanan. To be fair, you can't really top it.
yeah, I should have gone.
You're over
la-
here
I
with a
should've gone
minor
last.
character, Maxwell.
No, she's one of the most emotional deaths in all of Star Wars. What it means for Obi-Wan and Maul's storyline together.
It does mean a lot, and I do love that story arc in the Clone Wars. But when you were saying that, when Satine said, or Obi-Wan said to Satine that if you had asked, I would have left the order for you. It reminded me of the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic series that I'm looking at on your wall, when it has a very similar beat that Palpatine is trying to seduce Anakin and convince him to like leave the Jedi, and Obi-Wan is talking to, I think, Yoda, and he says like, I made a promise to Qui-Gon, I'm going to train Anakin no matter what, so if Anakin leaves, I have to also to continue his training. And it's like a great moment for his relationship with Anakin, and this is the Satine one's a great moment for his relationship with Satine, but when you look at them together, it's like, damn, Obi-Wan will leave for anything.
Just feels willing to get out of there.
We're lucky we kept him around.
The dude was just looking for an excuse. Order 66 hit, and he said, thank God, I'm out of here.
Good, I've been looking for retirement.
Yeah, I need a new job.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so like Matt said, we didn't get to some of our honorable mentions earlier, so real quick, let's just throw a couple out there. Luke, what were some for you?
Yeah, it breaks my heart. I wanted to do like a top 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 because there's just so many that I would love to get to, and I feel bad leaving them out. I mean, Han Solo, that's my first honorable mention. That is such a significant death in Star Wars, let alone the sequel trilogy and Kylo Ren and Rey's character arcs. It is very well shot, very well done. I wish I could have put it higher, but what are you gonna do? And then my last honorable mention is Maul, who is probably not my favorite character, but top 3 characters in all of Star Wars. He has such a great story, from tragic beginnings to devastating endings, and we still don't even know all of it. There's still so much more to explore, and it's all going to be just as sad. And the way also that his death scene is shot in Rebels, the way he and Obi-Wan exchange stances and imitate the Qui-Gon and who Obi-Wan is, and whether he's the young duelist Obi-Wan Kenobi or the old sage Ben Kenobi, and the way Maul tries to use the same move to kill him like he did Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan counters it, and it's not a flashy or a big fight, but it's just so meaningful.
Yeah, very poetic. And it would not mean nearly as much if it wasn't for the death of Satine Kryze.
That's true.
I will die on that hill.
I'm
surprised.
love the death of Satine Kryze. I don't mean to. I know I said I was taking the wind out of your sails. It was just because I was mentioning something tangentially related. That is a great death.
I'm surprised that you didn't go with Qui-Gon as an honorable mention. He's your second favorite Jedi of all time, isn't he?
Yeah, and his death is very cool for like what it means to Anakin, but I mean, at the end of the day, he just kind of lost a duel.
Yeah, the scene's cool.
At the end of the day,
The scene's
you
cooler.
just got bested, bud.
Yeah. I'll go with my honorable mentions as well, real quick. It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. I feel like to start off on a very odd note, the Grand Inquisitor. in Rebels is such a great death. I think when he falls to his death, battling Kanan, I think that is
I wanted to include
insanely
that,
good.
but I hadn't read the comic recently enough. Do you remember? Because when the Grand Inquisitor dies, he says there are some fates worse than death, and he doesn't actually die there. He gets like trapped in a Force Nexus because he appears in comics later to Luke Skywalker, and he's like trapped in basically Force Purgatory or something, and it's even sadder.
Is that where Ahsoka's at right now in the World Between Worlds? Because she also fell. But okay, well, I guess that nixes that. But either way, I'm going to go with
still a good
what I know is that I think that was one of the most intense moments in Rebels. I don't know. I loved it. It's super intense. Somebody
The way
else.
Kanan uses both lightsabers and says, "Now I have nothing to fear." And
Yeah, it's rad.
yeah, that's a
And
great
then
scene.
also Marva from Andor. I think she is. She's a her death fractures that community and brings Andor back, obviously. And I think what she is able to do during the funeral procession, which we've talked in to great lengths to already in the Andor review, but I think her death is great, not because she's an interesting character, but just for what it does for the story and what it does for the rebellion is really cool. And then this is a bit of a cheat, so obviously I wasn't going to put this, but the death of Anakin Skywalker, right? Not necessarily Darth Vader. I know technically Anakin, he turns good and turns back to Anakin and then dies as an older man, but when he's on Mustafar and that that's what I would call the death of Anakin Skywalker.
When he burns.
When he burns and he is yelling at Obi-Wan, it is frightening. And going through Revenge of the Sith, you're starting with the death of Dooku, which is jarring, and then you're ending with the death of Anakin Skywalker right before he becomes Darth Vader, is a great bookend to that movie. And it is frightening still to this day. And I think Hayden Christensen's performance, if anybody talks about his acting, I think that is a scene to look to, specifically in that original trilogy, and thinking that like those were obviously directions given to him to act a certain way, because he can obviously act, and it is in that last scene.
This is a freezing cold take because people nowadays have finally come around to appreciating the prequels. There's a lot of Hayden's acting that got a lot of hate that I always thought was good. That scene in particular, yeah, I always thought that was great acting by Hayden. Also, the part in Attack of the Clones where he says, talking about the sand people, they're animals, and I slaughter them like animals, I hate them. I also think that's good acting.
Mm-hmm.
He's very emotionally upset and distraught, and it's unsettling, and I would be too. I agree.
Yeah, death of Anakin Skywalker is a good one. Similar to what I was saying about Kylo Ren. It's like up until that point for Anakin, he was doing bad things for good reasons. Like he was going to overthrow the Empire, and maybe he was going to institute a new empire under his rule, and he would have been fair and good, and he wanted to do it for Padme and for their children. But no, after that scene, he is nothing but rage and hate.
Yeah.
So before we did this, when we were talking about this episode, we briefly talked about the idea of maybe doing like a not top 10 or something like ESPN. And I thought it'd be funny to do characters who I think are almost certainly not dead. In that list, I would include Mace Windu, Tech, and I think I would add Grand Inquisitor to that. People who
God
you can
damn it.
absolutely, well, no, not that he's not dead, right? But people who absolutely can and probably will come back as soon as they start running out of ideas again.
Yeah.
But a couple honorable mentions that I wanted to run through aren't very flashy deaths, but sometimes they just need to be something to kind of entertain you. So 3 of the most entertaining deaths that I have. Number 1, the jet trooper in The Rise of Skywalker, who gets shot in the jetpack and he flies around like a balloon being let out of air, and then he crashes into the side of a mountain in a comically large fireball. It's so out of place, and I love it. I think it's goofy and hilarious. Another one comes from Kenobi. We see a stormtrooper get shot, fall off a tower onto a laser gate, and just gets sliced in half. And it's the first time that you really see something like that in Star Wars. They always kind of like imply that that's what would happen, but just seeing it was so jarring. You're like, oh my goodness. And then the other one also comes from The Last Jedi, to no one's surprise. The Praetorian Guard during the fight in Snoke's throne room that just gets tossed into what you think is just another endless pit, but is apparently some sort of meat grinder, and just shrapnel of his armor just comes like shooting out of it, and like you like get that sound effect of like a grinder, and it's like, what was that? Why was that there? Why is there no railing around that? And every time in that scene, because that scene is so epic, and then there's like that weird, I feel like that's a comedic beat almost, where I'm like, what the
That is another hill that I will die on that I don't know if we've ever talked about it. In the theatrical release of The Last Jedi, the sound effect was different than in the DVD and Disney Plus release, because it used to sound like a meat grinder, and now it sounds more electric, like a, I don't know. But
You think you
I
think
they
you heard it
changed
different in the theaters?
I think it was different in theaters. Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Well, before we leave, does anyone have any force for thought for this episode?
I do have some force for thought. This past week, my wife was driving a lot, and she was asking me for book recommendations and for audiobooks, and so I gave her a bunch of Star Wars ones, and she has never really read the Star Wars books, but she likes romance books, so I recommended Lost Stars, and she loved it. And she was like, oh, that was so good love story, and what's another? And I was like, well, I can't think of a single other romance book in Star Wars, and so she looked up Rebel Rising, and she was like, oh, I'll give this one a go. And I was like, okay, it's not really a love story, it's kind of a prelude to Rogue One, and I think it's kind of dark. And so she's reading it, and it's always interesting talking to her about Star Wars because of what she does and doesn't know. It's so arbitrary. I mean, she's seen the movies, but has forgotten half of it. And so she was telling me, like, yeah, this book is really dark. Like, Saw Gerrera went to try to skin a guy's face off, and I was like, oh my God, are you serious? And she was like, yeah, because he found out that this guy knew Jyn Erso was an Imperial scientist's daughter. And I was like, well, we knew that. And she's like, oh, but you didn't know that he like tried to skin his face off? I was like, no, that is so different.
An action he does versus the implications of what he is in the galaxy and who's he's connected to are very different things. That's hilarious.
All right. Well, let us know what you think. Are there any other major deaths that we left off our list that you think should have been included? Let us know. You can reach us across all the socials at Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. You can message us. You can email us at forceforthought@gmail.com. We never plugged that one, but shoot us an email.
Oh man, we're opening up a floodgate there.
They're gonna start putting us for their spam accounts.
and also let us know if you want to book us for a private event to do the podcast.
We will come to Nebraska.
Nebraska and Wisconsin. Those are the only two states. See you, Sammy.